Guys, Greta was right. We killed Earth. So now we're on inhospitable Mars. Our mission is now to dig and mine our way to a terraformed Mars. Our future, our kin, will be rewarded for our sacrifice. Then, one day, we lose someone important to us, which leads us to be taken to the surface for the first time, only to find that Elon and Trumpety Trump didn't die on Earth, and our sacrifice actually is control and slavery. After some plastic surgery and training, of course, to look more like Trumpety Trump, we are dumped back into a medieval castle with a bunch of Trumps and Elons. Then we rise up and make our Roman Empire by standing on the backs of women. Struggling to see how this is an amazing book? Let's chat. Let's go, Chuff. Hi Grinches, and welcome to the first personalised reading vlog. You guys voted for Red Rising, so let's get into it. Okay, so this vlog is about Red Rising as voted for by you guys. I was really happy when you guys voted for this one. It was a close call, honestly. I genuinely thought it was going to be Holes, and then it was tied right up until the last minute. So it was an interesting vote. So thanks you guys for making this a fun time. Okay, so Holes by Louis Sasha. I'm so bad at saying this guy's name. This is a middle grade classic. Realistically, a lot of people have read this book, and I don't honestly know how I hadn't read it before, but it was such a great time. I gave it a good solid 4 stars. I really enjoyed the dynamic between the boys, and I enjoyed the plot as a general rule, but I felt like because it was a middle grade, it simplified things a little bit too much. So I would have liked it not to talk to that age group like they don't know stuff. I don't know if that makes sense outside of my head, but this is one of the very few downsides I found to this book. Another one was that I think I was missing some of the colloquialisms that were used in it, just because I'm not from that area. I did find it a really funny read. I loved, like I said before, I loved the interaction between the boys, and I really enjoyed their sort of journey with each other, but also individually as well. I loved that they came from different backgrounds and had different stories. I could have done with a little bit more backstory on some of the boys that weren't the main character. That would have been quite nice, but I have since found that there's more books, and I think it's maybe a series, so maybe we'll find out more if you read more of the series. I don't know. If you've continued to read this series, let me know what your thoughts were. There was a lot of focus on race, especially in the beginning when you were introduced to each character, and that felt a little bit uncomfortable. It didn't feel very needed. There's ways to put across someone's race without saying this person was black. It just felt very much like separating people out by race almost, and that didn't sit very well for me. I did feel that there were a couple of sentences, like there was one that was where one of the kids said that they were glad that there were no racial problems, like it was an expected thing, and maybe it was for that time, and maybe that's why it doesn't sit well for me, because why are we expecting there to be racial problems? Like there was no backstory for that to explain it, or it just sort of introduced it as a concept without actually explaining it. And I feel like in a middle grade that's really especially important, because that's the age group where people are starting to learn racism, or how not to be racist. And I felt like that wasn't done very well in this instance. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this. I did plan on watching the movie with Matt the same weekend that I read it, but we just didn't get around to it. I can't even remember why now. So that was my overall thoughts on Holes. Okay, back to Red Rising. Why we're here after all. I do want to pop some content warnings in here for sexual violence, and it is sexual violence only directed at females in this situation. So if it is something that will bug you or make you upset, this may not be something for you. I will pop on the screen when I'm about to go into a spoiler section. I will verbalize it too, probably, hopefully, depends how ranty I get. So I will make it clear the bits that you want to avoid, and I will also pop it in the timestamps so you can easily skip sections if you haven't read this book yet and want to avoid spoilers. So this is a world where people are separated out into colours. There are sort of like the top of the hierarchy is the golds. They are the best of the best. They are superior in almost, well, every way, physically, mentally, health-wise, strength-wise, any way that you can think of, they are superior and therefore control every other colour. There are colours that are in the middle, so the blues, the greys. They are the people that sort of like fly the spaceships, that run the. They're the clergy, they're the doctors, they're the police, that kind of thing. The sort of everyday Joe, I guess. And then you've got the lower classes. So you've got the Reds, who obviously the first book is very focused on the Reds rising up. They are the miners. They live underground on Mars. And you've also got the Pinks, who are basically the sex slaves and the servants. You've also got the Obsidians, who are trained for battle only, and they have a higher death rate because they're the ones sent to fight all the battles, basically. So yeah, so that's a rough overview of the class system, I guess, in this dystopian sci-fi novel. Now, I will start with saying I love this book and I cannot wait to carry on this series. However, there are some problematic things that I will go over. The first one being that women are basically a tool for the men to feel better about themselves, mostly. Not all of the violence, but all of the sexual violence is aimed at women. And even though the colour system is that it's sort of like fairly equal between male and female, that is very focused on a binary gender system. But gender roles, as we know them in our world, are not really, they're very different, basically. There are plenty of female obsidians, say. There are plenty, so it isn't like divided up like it is here in terms of, a woman's role, so to speak, which you would think, that's really exciting to see that. But women are suppressed in a very different way. And the book starts off with, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, if you like to go in completely blind, the book starts off with Darrow, who is the main character's wife, doing something very extreme in order to get him to see the light of his ways, because he is on the surface very happy with his life at the beginning. He doesn't see any problem with the sacrifice that the Reds are making in order to build society for future generations. And if that was the case, then you would think, well, okay, I can see why he's happy with that, Due to the experience, the thing that his wife does near the beginning, he ends up going up to the surface and being taken up to the surface by a group of people. So this group is effectively the people that took the blue pill and know what the deal is, and take Darrow up to the surface, where he realises that where they have been told that they are working to terraform Mars so that is livable, it has already been terraformed and people are living on the surface quite happily and have been for a long time. So his bubble is burst effectively at this point, and then he is genetically modified, shall we say, and trained to become a gold, and he infiltrates the golds. So, I mean, this is a very simplified version of what happens in this book, but starting with Darrow's wife, it's very much like females are there to move the plot forward, but they are not seen as important enough. They have to die or be tortured, sexually tortured in some way. They have to have a much harder existence, but much less reward out of it. And that to me I didn't really like that, honestly. I feel like Pierce Brown could have worked a little bit harder to write the women characters better. However, I'm not letting it go, but I'm putting it to one side and keeping an eye. I'm putting a pin in it. That's what I'm doing, because I'm hoping that as the series goes on, this changes, that Pierce can figure out a way to write women better. This is in space. This is on Mars, and there are parts of it in space. There is parts of it on spaceships. But you also feel like you're in the Roman Empire at one point. You're in a medieval castle at some points. You're in no man's land at another point. So it is kind of all over the place in that respect. So to me, I feel like we need some semblance of like unity between the sexes. That is to say, I have complained already that the gender is very binary in this, but there is some LGBT representation because there are some gay characters. Okay, so one of my notes was very specifically, why do women have to only be worthwhile if they are violated and or murdered? So that basically puts in one sentence what I've just waffled on about for probably 15 minutes. To me, like there's a lot of talk about this book. When I've watched videos about this, there's a lot of people comparing it to the Hunger Games, and I understand why, because on the surface, when they are put into this score and they're sort of paired, like put into groups, and they do have to sort of effectively wipe each other out in order to win, wipe each other out or recruit them as part of their own team, I guess. So there is a choice, but other than that, that's as far as the connection with Hunger Games goes, other than it's a dystopian environment, that's it. It's a very superficial connection for me personally. It is a very oppression and justice situation, but to me it had more in common with Game of Thrones, but in space, than it did Hunger Games. If you've read this with me as part of the Sibs book club or just any time, let me know what your thoughts are on this, because I found this comparison to Hunger Games really interesting, because people really, really go hard for this comparison, and I didn't get it in the same way. There were very strong themes of identity, how we view ourselves, how we carry ourselves, and how we change over time. But obviously in this setting, because Darrow has been genetically modified, shall we say, to become a gold, who are like over 6'5", whereas the reds are quite short. The golds are very sort of lean and muscly. I don't know, like I really struggled to see the changes as they were being described, if that makes sense. But I think that's more of a problem with my imagination rather than the problem with the book, because I think for me, I just need things like that to take a little bit longer than they did in the book, so that my brain can take the time to imagine them. But I do think that the description is really well done in this book. For example, I had like a visceral reaction. There's a point where someone is sick in their helmet and then is forced to put the helmet back on their head. And like that for me was just, I was literally like balking while reading. It. So the description is really, really good in this. The character building and going back to the identity thing is really, really strong in this book, and will carry you through these things that don't feel very nice. It does have a very thriller vibe to it. It is very fast-paced, is what I would say, and I think that speaks really well to the sci-fi and the dystopian elements, but also with the fantasy elements thrown in as well. It just is just a magical experience, in my opinion. The whole identity thing, obviously Darrow is 16 at the beginning of Red Rising, and I think the book spans a couple of years, So he gets to about 18. But in that time, obviously, in the real world, we change a lot between 16 and 18. But in this setting, it is an extreme change. Like this kid starts off like very like chill, happy to be who he is. By the end of it, he's very focused on being someone else because he has to, in order to be a gold, he has to lean into the traits that he has naturally that fit with the gold, but then fake the aspects that don't. So he is quite an angry person, shall we say, and golds are not allowed to show that anger. They're not allowed to lose it effectively. So there are lots of points in this that you witness him holding in his emotions, and having to relay this very calm facade when inside he's basically wanting to rip people to shreds, which is really interesting. And like it keeps you it adds that thriller vibe because you're just like, at some point he has to lose it. And there are points that he does that he finds a way to let it go. So there's a point where he is spoiler, there is a point at the beginning of like the school section where they are put into what's called the passage, and they're paired off into rooms, and basically only one of them is allowed to leave. So it means that the person that is leaving has to kill the other person, and he is paired up with effectively the weakest link in the whole team, but he is the weakest link, but is an extremely important person to one of the other people that ends up being his lieutenant effectively. And that is really interesting to see the evolution of that part of the plot. And when he kills this person, he kills them in such a brutal fashion that he sort of like literally loses the plot. He has no awareness of what he's doing in this moment. And then later on, when it's shown, like these things are filmed, very much this is, I guess, another element that's like Hunger Games, I guess, because these things are then brought up and used against them to control the situation by the powers that be. So it is, oh my god, like there's so many elements of this, guys, that I could literally rant about this book for hours, and I'm not going to, because I need to get this film edited and uploaded in the next 5 hours if I'm going to be on time. So if I'm late, you know what's happened. You know, and hopefully you'll be there for it. During the competition, I did forget that we were on Mars. It did feel very medieval. They are walking around wearing animal pelts, stinking to high heaven, scrabbling for food in medieval style castles. It did feel like a complete world change, which honestly, it didn't jar me as much as it sounds like it should. I did kind of enjoy that change in scenery, I guess. I did also enjoy that all of their names were very Romanesque and they all meant something, and it kind of tied in with their roles in the book as well. This was really a cool aspect to think about. I didn't write any examples of this down, and I should have. Again, this is a little note to myself for future reading vlogs. This is something I want to note. But yeah, it was definitely a rabbit hole that I fell into well and truly. Spent a lot of time Googling these names and what they represented in the Roman characters that they were named after. And it really did tie in. Clearly, the author for this has spent time researching Roman empires. And this is definitely, I would be shocked if I saw an interview with this author that said that it wasn't inspired by the Roman time period. And to finish up, my favourite, I can't choose a favourite character, honestly, but my favourite group within the book, and this could be a little bit controversial because they're not necessarily good guys, but it's the Howlers. Let me know in the comments if you had a favourite character or a favourite group within the book. To me, the Howlers, I don't know, I have a very strong visual image of them. They did some really crappy things, but they were so funny in the process. I don't know. I felt very much like these guys were the ones that I could sort of separate myself from the atrocious behavior, because it felt very much like in my head I visualized them more like a slapstick sort of comedy duo. So it felt like when they were doing awful things, apart from a couple of moments where it got a bit too real, generally speaking, it was very like, it didn't feel very, the horrible stuff didn't feel very real. But I think as well, because we know from the beginning that people effectively can be like healed in a way that we wouldn't be able to be healed in the real world, and people don't necessarily stay dead. I think when awful things happen, you don't lose hope in the same way as you would if that was that. So it does sort of lend to them comical moments. I don't know. What did you guys think? Anybody that's read it? If you haven't read it, let me know in the comments if you plan to read it after watching this. I am also planning on putting a playlist of videos that I watched after reading this, of other YouTubers that have done Red Rising videos that I found really interesting. Some of what they've said, I've also said because I felt the same, but there are some different things. And there is one rant review where she genuinely hated this book, which I found that I didn't agree with very much, but it was fun to watch. So I will pop that playlist in the description box for you guys below if you want to watch them things too. I don't need to do the usual end to this video for the simple fact it's just for you guys. So I don't have to say like, share, all of that jazz, which is kind of freeing actually. I'm looking forward to the next reading vlog. Okay, love you, bye.
Bye, love you.
Books and coffee, that's all I need. Lost in...
Greta was right. We killed Earth. So now we're on Inhospitable. What do you mean I can't put it in outtakes? I don't know what I'm doing. Where is my notes about holes? I had notes. I should have written down examples of this, but I did not, because I am not very good at my job.